I'm Jenny Wood. I'm an executive in G-Tech at Google for an org that helps drive billions of dollars in annual advertising revenue. And I'm also the founder of a program called Own Your Career, which is an initiative used by tens of thousands of Googlers to help increase their impact and influence at work. Outside of work, I'm writing a book about how to get what you want unapologetically, and Jason Feifer has been a large inspiration for that. Jason's the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. He's the author of Build for Tomorrow, which we'll talk about today, a startup advisor, a host of multiple podcasts. LinkedIn named him a top voice in entrepreneurship in 2022. And prior to working at Entrepreneur Magazine and leading the charge there, he worked as an editor at Men's Health, Fast Company, Maxim, and Boston Magazine. Jason has also written about business and technology for the Washington Post, Slate, New York Magazine, and others. In this talk we're about to have, you're going to learn how to adapt more quickly to life shifts and use change to your advantage. Be more resilient in times of uncertainty and anxiety. And we'll also teach you practical tools to face the future with optimism versus fear. So, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Jason Feifer.
Woo! Hey, Jenny.
It's
Hey,
Jason
everybody.
Feifer.
I'm so happy to be here.
We're so excited to have you chatting with us at Google. So let's just start with the 4 phases you talk about in your book. What are the 4 phases of change?
Yeah. So I had, for a number of years, had this theory, which was, as editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, I have this amazing opportunity to meet with just the most driven, accomplished people, big risk takers. And I wanted to understand what it was that was driving their success so that anybody in any position, whether you're starting a company or you're just working at a great company like Google, can take advantage of and build your own career. And the theme that I kept coming back to was adaptability. That adaptability is really the key driver to success. But how do people use it? How do they develop adaptability? Is it something people are born with? Is it a skill you can learn? And the pandemic was really the big breakthrough moment for me in understanding this, because of course we all remember we got to see everybody go through the same change at the same time and then radically diverge in how they reacted to it. And some people reinvented themselves, reinvented their careers, and really propelled themselves forward. And other people clung very tightly to what they were feeling like they were losing, and as a result, missed out on opportunities. And that, I think, is something that we replay all the time. I came to this theory of how change happens for every individual, which is what you're asking, Jenny, which is that change happens in 4 phases to everybody. And that is panic, adaptation, new normal, and wouldn't go back. Panic, lots of feelings of that these days, obviously. And we just don't know what's going on. We feel totally disoriented. Adaptation is where we start to say, okay, I have some new things that I can work with here. I have some shifts that I understand. New normal is where we build a new foundation. We have some kind of new comfort. And then finally, wouldn't go back is when we step back and realize I have something so new and valuable that I wouldn't want to go back to a time before I had it. My argument to you is that everybody goes through these 4 phases, even people who seem incredibly adaptable. Some people use panic to propel them forwards. Other people use panic as a way to cling to what happened before. And wouldn't go back is something that is available to you no matter what kind of change you are going through or fearing. It is really a matter of how confidently can you move towards it and recognize that the big shift that you're experiencing right now is an opportunity.
You started this whole introduction of the phases talking about adaptability. And I think panic seems visceral. New normal seems like there's a level of acceptance by that point. Wouldn't go back seems downright exciting, but adaptation sounds hard.
Yeah.
This audience loves practical tips and strategies. What are some practical ways our listeners and watchers can use adaptation to their advantage? What can they do in that difficult stage?
Yeah. So look, there's a lot, and we can talk about a whole bunch, but I want to offer you as a starting point what I feel like is a real foundational thing that you should be doing. And you can do it at any time, but the earlier you do this, the more guidance you'll be giving yourselves for how to navigate some kind of big change. So it is what I call the thing that does not change in times of change. This is what we need to find in ourselves. And I think that we all...
This is the thing that does not change in times of change.
The thing that does not change in times of change.
Okay.
What is it that you have? What thing about you does not change in times of change? That's what we're going to find out. And the reason why this is so important is because we make a mistake. And Jenny, I'm sure you've made it many times. I've made it many times in my career. And that is that we identify too closely with the product of our work, which is to say that we tie our identities to either the thing that we make or the role that we occupy. If someone comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do, it is almost certainly likely that your answer is going to be, I do blank at Google, right? Or I am title at Google, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that all of that is changeable. I mean, it's changeable in that your role at Google could change. It's changeable that you might not be at Google. And so when we tie our identities too closely to the output of our work or the roles that we occupy, then as soon as any of that changes, and it will, then we start to feel not just that we had changes to our work, but we had changes to our identity. And that's when we start to feel incredibly disoriented. And that's what leads to panic. I know your question was about adaptability, but I think we need to go back to panic. And so what I've come to realize is that we need something that we can identify, that is the thing about us that does not change in those times of change. We need to identify the thing that's deeper. And so, Jenny, I'll walk you through an example or an exercise that we can do to get there. Because what I found is that entrepreneurs in particular, but also great leaders, are really good at identifying something about themselves that is so core that it can be expressed in endless different ways. And if you can identify that and articulate it, then you're giving yourself some kind of direction, an orientation point to move through change. So by way of example, when I was a newspaper reporter, that's how I started out. I was a newspaper reporter. I loved being a newspaper reporter. My identity was a newspaper reporter. I stayed in jobs too long that I didn't love because I was afraid of losing a newspaper reporter. I saw firsthand how that sense of loss anchored me to something that didn't feel right. I've come up with a new way to think of myself. I'm not a newspaper reporter. I'm not a magazine store. I'm going to get there. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to run you through a scenario. Same scenario, 3 different times, little change each time. It is this. If someone comes up to you at a party, like I just said, someone comes up to you at a party and asks what you do, what do you say?
Can I try it? Can we pretend we're at a party?
That's exactly what we're going to do. Yeah.
Okay,
exactly
perfect.
Okay.
All right.
Someone comes up to a party and they ask what you do. What's the first thing you say?
Oh, you're asking me or I'm asking you?
No, I'm asking you.
All right. I am the America's GSM lead for Google.
Awesome. Most people at a party have no idea what you just said.
I totally agree with that.
But that's okay. I would have said, back then, I am a newspaper reporter. And that means that I go out and I report, I go out and I gather the news and I write about it and I put it in the newspaper. Great. What have we done here? What we've done is we have talked about our tasks, right? That's the first thing we identify with. I am this. I occupy this role. That's phase 1. We're going deeper. Phase 2. Someone comes up to you at a party and they ask what you do. Jenny, anything that you thought about before, I mean, you just said your title, but anything related to it that you just thought about, you cannot say. It's off the table. Nothing about tasks, nothing about role. Now, what do you talk about? I think what you're going to talk about is you're going to talk about your skills. You're going to talk about what you're good at. So if someone comes up to your party and asks what you do, what do you say?
I help customers be more successful through better operations.
Great. So that's a lot clearer. People understand what you're talking about now. And I would have said this. I would have said, what do? I go out. I'm really good at, because I'm talking about skills. I would say, I'm really good at gathering information, processing information, and then making it useful to others. So this is good. What we're doing here is we're now removing ourselves from the day-to-day, and we're removing ourselves from the things that feel perhaps most changeable. but we're not quite there yet because this is just our skills. And, the skills that as yours are. So how can we go deeper? One more time, we're going to run the scenario. Someone comes up to you at a party and asks what you do. Can't talk about your tasks, can't talk about your skills. So now what do we talk about? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to come up with a sentence. And if you're watching this right now, you may not have that sentence immediately. That's fine. It takes a long time to come up with a really good one, and you can revise it a million times, what I'm about to tell you. But I want you to come up with a sentence, a short one, that starts with I, in which every word is carefully selected because it is not anchored to something that is easily changeable. So I know that sounds abstract. So in this case, Jenny, I'll go first before I ask you to do it.
I actually think I already have it, but go ahead.
You already have it. Well,
I think I do.
And then I'll tell you mine.
I inspire success in others.
That's awesome, because here's the thing. I inspire success in others is something that you can do in so many different ways. I mean, you have already done it in that you occupy this one role at Google, but then you also created the Own Your Career, which is another way to do it at Google. Totally different role, totally different processes and all that stuff, but it's achieving that same mission, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, it's so different. What I do in the Own Your Career program that I founded at Google is so different than what I do in my day job here, but I inspire success in others is equally applicable regardless of that role. So I'm so excited to hear yours.
And there's no shortage of need for that in the world is the other thing, right? Which is great, because that means that if you have my friend Bruce Feiler, great best-selling author, likes to call life quakes. If you have a life quake and everything in your life just gets shaken up, right, then you can still inspire others in that way. And there will always be a need for that anywhere that you go. And once you recognize that in yourself, you have unlocked so much opportunity to do that, and you can move through it more confidently because you carry transferable value. So here's mine. So I say, I tell stories in my own voice.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. And look, let me break it down for you. I tell stories. Stories is a very carefully selected word. Why? Well, because my primary role is as editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. I don't own Entrepreneur Magazine. It's not my company. And that means, this is my phone. Here it is. There are my kids on the phone. And you know who has this number? My boss. He has this phone number. And he could call this phone at any time, including right now, which would be really weird. And he could fire me. He could. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. He could fire me. And if my identity is I'm a magazine editor, then I am one phone call away from losing my identity. And that is a terrible place to be. That's why I like stories, not magazine stories, not newspaper stories, not books, not podcasts, not speaking, stories. You cannot take that away from me. And then in my own voice. So that is me setting the terms for how I want to work at this stage in my career. I was just speaking the other day at a conference for a large risk management company. And after running through this exercise, a woman raised her hand and she said, I'm just having trouble coming up with my sentence. And I said, a good way to start is to break it apart into different components. So you see what I did there, right? I tell stories. That's drawing from my skill set. And then in my own voice is me establishing the terms based on what I want to do now in my career. So that's a good way to start thinking about the different components of how you can build this. But once you have this, to go back to your original question about, well, okay, how do we start to navigate change? Once you have this, you can see how now it's a guiding star. People talk a lot about finding your why, and that's fine, but I think it feels very abstract, which is why I really like this exercise where it's concrete and you give a real understanding of what you have to offer no matter what.
Yeah, that's very useful and very practical. And I would agree, it's maybe not the easiest to come up with. And I would assume that shouldn't be a blocker for someone to at least try to think about it, put it on paper. Because as you said, your boss could call you and fire you. I mean, let's also be very realistic about a huge thing that's going on at Google, because it's in the news, obviously, everybody's aware.
Yeah.
We've recently gone through a round of layoffs, and that's been extraordinarily challenging for those of us still at the company, and of course those who lost their jobs. And and Google's the type of company where so many people tie it to their identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so this helps, I think, decouple your title, your role, your position with the value you provide, the strengths and skills that you have, what drives you and what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And that's quite useful to go through that exercise and start to articulate what that value is for you and what you do offer the world, regardless of where you sit, where you work, etc.
That's exactly right. And that's a process I think everybody should be going through, because you want to understand what you have to offer that is not tied to something that you cannot control. A big part of this is really down to control. And unless you own the company, you don't control the future. And therefore, you need to find something that you do control. It is the reason why, and this is kind of skipping into something else here, but I'll just
go ahead. Yeah.
It is the reason why I think it's really important whenever something bad happens to try to reframe it not as a loss or not as a failure, but rather as a lesson. And the reason for that, right? Because if you can treat failure as data, then what you're really doing is you're taking control of that experience. Or the problem that we have when we feel like we lose something is that we feel like control has been taken away from us. But when we say, okay, this thing has radically changed, but it taught me something really important. I learned something as a result of it, and I can use that lesson and apply it somewhere. Now we're taking back control. We're just reframing the experience. And once we feel that sense of autonomy, there's the decades of psychological research has backed up this really amazing theory that I love called self-determination theory. Self-determination theory is that everybody needs three things. Just think about this for yourself. As soon as I heard this, it exploded my brain, because I was like, oh my God, this describes every reason why I've been happy or unhappy in certain circumstances. We need three things to be happy. We need autonomy, a sense of autonomy. We need competence. We need to feel competent in what we're doing. And we need relatedness. We need to feel connected to others. And when you feel autonomy, competency, and relatedness at work, you are happy and you are thriving. But if you lose one of those, and in a moment of instability, in a kind of post-layoff moment, one of the things I think people are probably feeling is some kind of loss of autonomy, because it feels unstable. You don't know what's going to happen, which means that you don't feel in control. And that's really scary. So anytime that we can reframe experiences or identify things about ourselves that we carry forward that are, as you said, decoupled from the actual work, that's us reclaiming autonomy and a feeling of control over what we're doing. And once we have those three things, we can feel steadier.
You mentioned loss in there.
Yeah.
Tell us about loss aversion bias and how that comes into play with change and future.
Yeah. So my theory is that the reason why we panic over change is in addition to that feeling of competency, which is really built in, or autonomy is really built into what I'm talking about here, is that we equate change with loss. It's the first thing that we do. We equate change with loss. So if something is changing in our work or in our lives, we immediately identify the thing that we have or have had that we're comfortable with and familiar with. And we start to think about how we're going to lose that. We're going to lose access to that. And that feels like loss. And then, because we are desperate to know what comes next, we start to build off of our assumption of loss. We start to extrapolate the loss, which is to say that we say, I lost this over here, which means I'm going to lose that, which means that I'm going to lose that, right? I mean, this is like probably every single time anyone's gone through a reorg, you feel some sense of that, because the way that you used to do something is now different, and you have tied into the way you used to do something a lot of your own value. And this is people trust or respect me because of my place in this process. And now that has changed, and therefore they're not going to trust me, and therefore I'm not going to have a job here anymore, and therefore I'm not going to find another job in the industry. And it spirals, and that's where panic comes from.
Or even this was a reorg I experienced at Google. I was on a team in New York, and then I was the only person who was taken off that team and put on a team in Chicago, though working remotely in New York. And those were my best friends. And they were, they'd come to my wedding. And,
Right.
I've lost my friends. I've lost my expertise. I've lost, any future potential for these close friendships. Like, it was this loss spiral that I experienced in this particular reorg for sure.
Yeah.
And then I said something stupid at one point in a big public all hands, and then I thought I'd lost my credibility. Like, there's a lot of loss that week for me.
Yeah. But here you still are, right?
And here I still am, right? I live to tell the tale because, as you said, this wasn't your exact quote, but I love it's not win or lose, it's win or learn. I definitely learned from that experience. And it was data. It was data of how not to do it next time.
And loss just doesn't compound in the way that we think it does, right?
Sure.
We naturally focus on loss. And look, give yourself some slack if you watching this feel this loss pile up, because this is what we are naturally programmed to do. Again, decades of psychological research confirm what's called loss aversion. Loss aversion is that we are naturally more inclined to protect against loss than we are to seek gain. And that means that we are always in these situations in which, I mean, just like by one incredibly stupid example, but I bet that a lot of people will relate to it, is like, I got a hot tip. I mean, it could have been a terrible tip, but it turned out to be a hot tip when Bitcoin was $4,000 a Bitcoin. A guy was like, buy it. So I bought 2 Bitcoin. And then when Bitcoin was $16,000, I was like, it can't possibly go any higher than this. And so I sold. And then, of course, absent what's happened now, but it spiked in a way. It was like, what was it, $50,000 or $60,000? And I had to stop paying any attention to this whole thing, because every time I heard about it, all I could think about was all the money I lost by selling early. I processed a gain that I made on buying a stupid thing. Sorry for those who really love Bitcoin, but as a loss. And that's how we often are programmed to think, is that everything is either about what we could have had that we lost, or that what we have that we can't lose. And when you spend the whole, if you cannot break yourself out of that, and we should talk about how to break out of that, when you can't break yourself out of that, then everything that happens feels like loss, and loss feels like panic.
So how do you break out of it?
So one of the things that you should do is start guiding your thoughts and guiding your assessment of a situation in just a really simple, practical way. Because again, if you're left to your own devices, you're going to start to think about loss. So how do we think about gain? I have these 3 questions that I like to ask. And that is, number 1, what new thing is happening? Just lay it out. What's happening? Number 2, what new habit or skill am I learning as a result? You're learning something. Something is happening. Question number 3, how can that be put to good use? Just try it. How can that be put to good use? Just hypothesize it. What could happen? I mean, I was just by way of example, I was just in San Francisco talking to a law firm, and it was fascinating because once we got to the Q&A, everyone's hands were up and they were all asking about AI, all about AI. Because their concern, of course, is that AI is going to start writing their legal briefs and they're going to be out of jobs. And afterwards, I asked the CEO about this. Like, why is everyone so focused on this? Because, okay, if you write legal briefs and AI can help you, doesn't that seem good? Doesn't that make your work more efficient? I was like, well, what's the problem exactly with that? And he said, the problem, and this is the reason everyone's freaking out, is because the business model is built around billable hours. And that means that if you have AI doing work that used to take hours and hours, and it can just spit it out like that, you don't have as many billable hours. That's why the lawyers are freaking out. And I said, well, that's fascinating, because if you go through this thing, what are we doing differently? What new habit or skill are we learning as a result? In that case, what new habit or skill would be like, okay, well, I guess I'm learning, once AI is sort of more rolled out in this way, I guess I'm learning how to use these new tools to make my work more efficient. How can that be put to good use? I'll tell you how. It can be put to good use because once you are thinking about how to do work differently, law firms have an amazing advantage to come up with a better model for billing their clients, because Now it's not about billable hours that everybody hates. Nobody loves billable hours, right?
Sure.
I mean, everybody should, like literally everybody who runs a business, everybody who works in a business, everybody who's watching this right now, you should step back right now and ask yourself this question, which I really love, which is like, what do people hate and how can I stop doing that?
Yeah.
because I just guarantee you that like some part of what you do every day, just because you inherited it, because you're just doing the thing that people told you to do, is something that other people hate. Maybe it's just that the number of meetings that you schedule and like somebody hates that. There's a better way to do it. So like, what do people hate? How can I stop doing that? So if we go back to that, well, law firms who are like, people hate billable hours. What if there's a totally different way that we can start to work with our clients? Clients will probably love it. Now AI went from breaking something to actually driving the solution for something. That is a version of what we can build into how we work all the time. This change that is happening to you, whatever it is teaching you something. It's creating new habits and it's creating new skills. And the question you have to ask and just start hypothesizing is, how can that be put to good use? And then start just trying, just start experimenting to see what happens.
Experimentation is interesting because I think this is highly applicable to our day-to-day at Google and to anybody else watching and listening at your own job. How do you think about experimentation within your current role? So you've already convinced us that there's a lot we can do with our skills that aren't necessarily tied to our title or our current position. So how do you experiment in ways that prepare you for the future? In the book, you talk about working your next job. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. So let me go there, but I'll create a little bridge, which is just to say that when I was, for the book, I was interviewing a really brilliant woman named Katie Milkman, who's at Wharton and studies how people make decisions and change. And she said, at the very end, I was like, look, what's just like the first thing somebody can do if they are struggling and trying to figure out how to make a change? And she said, she gave me two answers, actually, that I really loved, which I'll just share with you both briefly. So number one was experiment. She said, look, the problem we often have is that we think of everything that we do as a full commitment to that thing. And as a result, we're afraid to do it because we don't know if it's going to be right. And therefore, we don't know if we should commit to it. So we just don't. So instead, reframe it. It's an experiment. Everything's an experiment. Do you have an idea of how something can go? Do you want to try something new? Do you want to explore some new responsibility or something at Google? Treat it as an experiment, or do you want to learn a new skill? Treat it as an experiment. Think of it as an experiment. Say, I'm going to do this for 3-6 months or whatever, and then I'm going to assess.
Or even not 3-6 months, even 30 minutes. For example, someone who reports to me said, I really feel confident about my written communication skills, but I know that as I continue to grow in my career at Google, my verbal communication skills and presentation skills are going to be even more important. Can you think of opportunities for me to practice that? And so she was basically saying, I want to experiment with this thing that's particularly hard for me. And it wasn't even like, oh, let's go find a 6-month project to work on with some other team. We were just looking for a 30-minute opportunity for her to present on a topic to allow her to hone that next skill, because she knew it was going to be important for anything, she did at Google in the future.
I love that. I think that's great. And that's a really great point that you made. It doesn't have to, 3-6 months sounds like a large commitment. 30 minutes, not that much. Just try it out. It's an experiment. And you know what? Once you think of it as an experiment and you frame it to yourself as an experiment, then it works.
There's no downside.
There's no downside. It works. It doesn't work. Either way, an experiment has one of two options. It worked or it didn't work. So the experiment was a success because you learned something, and that's it. So that really matters. And then the other thing that she said that was really interesting was she introduced me to the concept of the false consensus effect. So the false consensus effect is that we tend to assume that other people think like us. And therefore, we don't think to ask them how they are doing something or approaching something or trying something. The false consensus effect. And so what do you do instead? The answer is you ask people, what are you doing? If you're struggling on a task or you are curious about trying something new, go to somebody and say, how did you do that? What process did you use? How did you get to that point? And what you will learn is that they have come up with something that you hadn't thought of, and you can just copy and paste their approach, their philosophy on it. And this is, again, experimentation and overcoming the false consensus effect. These are not radical ideas, but they are things that are available to us constantly that we often don't do because we don't think it's on the table. That is what's really important. So, are you going to jump in?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead. So let me tell you about work your next job, because that's what you're actually teeing up. In front of you right now, anybody who's watching, there are two sets of opportunities. What I like to call opportunity set A and opportunity set B. Opportunity set A is everything that is asked of you. So you report to somebody at Google, and that person has specific expectations of what you have to do, and you have certain roles, certain jobs you have to finish, whatever it is. That's opportunity set A. Do a good job at the things that are asked of you. But there's also opportunity set B. Opportunity set B is everything that is available to you that nobody is asking you to do.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
And this could be at Google, for sure. You already have described a couple different ways. For you, Jenny, specifically, creating Own Your Career was not something anybody asked you to do.
Definitely not. I just saw the opportunity available and I was like, there's a need. I'm going to help.
Right. But, it also could happen outside of Google. You could take a class on something. You could decide, I really like listening to podcasts. Why don't I start a podcast? You buy a microphone for $100.
You and I both have full-time jobs, and you just wrote a book and I'm writing a book. No, it's available to us. It wasn't required.
That's right. Nobody was asking us to do. My argument is that opportunity set B, the thing that is available to you that nobody's asking you to do, is always more important. That's not to say that opportunity set A, the things that are asked of you, is unimportant. It is important. You have to do it, and you have to do it well. But if you only focus on the things that you already do, you will only be qualified to do the things you're already doing.
It's like what got you here is not going to get you there. Classic.
Exactly, which is like the most brilliant book title of all time.
Totally.
I'm very jealous of it. So right, but opportunity set B is where growth happens. So I mean, I'll just give you a quick example of like what does that look like? All right, so rewind a number of years ago. I was an editor at Fast Company, and I was just a mid-level editor. I was in my early 30s. And my job was to edit stories for the print magazine. One day, a video team was created. They hired a bunch of people and they created a video team. And the video team was looking for talent, people, editors, to stick in front of a camera. Nobody asked me to do this. But I decided, I think that it would be good for me to know how to do that. How to be on camera, how to act, how to move. What is it going to lead to? I have no idea. And that's the thing. It's really important to know that when you pursue opportunity set B, you do not need to know what the return on investment is going to be. You do not. You don't need to know.
A really, really good caveat, because this is a data-focused group here, and we think about ROI and we think about priorities and being strategic. So that's a wonderful invitation to everybody listening. Yeah.
Do not. I mean, again, let's go back to experiment. We're going to experiment. We're going to try it out. You do not need to know, because the thing is that oftentimes the payoff is going to be in an unexpected way. So I volunteered. I got in front of the camera. The director, this guy named Scott, told me, hey, you're not bad, but here are a bunch of ways that you can improve. And he helped me figure out things like how to talk on camera, how to move my face on camera. You possibly have noticed, or you haven't noticed, hopefully, because I'm not being weird about it, but I move and I'm animated. And that's stuff that I all learned from being on camera there. Now, what did I get out of that? Did anybody give me a television show? No. But years later, when I was applying to be editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, one of the things that the CEO and the president really liked about me was that I was good on camera and therefore able to go out and represent the brand. They knew they could stick me on television. They knew they could send me around onto stages, and I would be a good face of the brand, which is one of the roles of the editor-in-chief. Now, that's in one of the ways that how I got this job. And then once I got that job, more opportunities opened up, including like what's happening today. I have all of this material in my head and we're moving through it in random ways. And I have to think on the fly and I have to do it while maintaining eye contact with the camera, which is not a natural thing that I had to learn over a period of time. And these kinds of opportunities I attribute directly to volunteering to stand in front of a camera at Fast Company and have absolutely no idea what the purpose of it was. But it turned out to be a skill set that was foundational to a lot of opportunity later in my career.
Even though it felt scary and nerve-wracking and uncertain and with unclear ROI.
Yes. And one of the, look, you will, in the course of putting yourself out in opportunity set B things, you will be in situations that you do not feel prepared for. And I will give you a way to think about that when you're in those moments. One of the things that I get to do, because I am editor-in-chief of a magazine, is interview a lot of celebrities for the cover. I was talking to Ryan Reynolds, and Ryan Reynolds, actor obviously, but also maybe people know, created an advertising agency, very successful, is owner of Mint Mobile and Aviation Gin. And anyway, so he was telling me about how he had moved from one thing to another. He didn't know anything about business. And he said this line to me that I immediately wrote down. I loved it, which is, he said, to be good at something, you have to be willing to be bad.
Oh, which is so true and so hard.
So hard. But once you absorb that idea, what you realize is that we often think the thing that makes the difference between people who are successful and not successful is that the successful people just pick something up really fast and are just good at it. No, the thing that actually divides people is whether or not you are willing to be bad long enough to get to good. Because most people quit. And the people who like are willing to be in that uncomfortable state are the ones who are going to grow. So what I've learned for myself, so now like that's fine, and you're like, okay, well that's interesting, but what do I do with it? So I'll give you a sentence to tell yourself, because it's the sentence that I tell myself whenever I do something that I feel out of place in. I remember the first time that I ever gave a talk, I was in Scottsdale, Arizona. I was standing on the side of it, like a keynote talk in front of a group. I was standing on the side of the stage. I'm being introduced. Marcus Lemonis is after me, the guy from CNBC's The Prophet. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. I practiced this talk. Is anyone going to like this? Am I going to sound foolish? Marcus Lemonis is going to hear me bomb. It's going to be awful. And I'm thinking, what can I tell myself that will get me on that stage? And the thing that I came up with in that moment is, I can't wait to do this the second time. Because as soon as you say that to yourself, I can't wait to do this the second time, you have reframed the experience. And now the experience is not about being successful right now. The experience is about learning so that next time is better. And once that's where the bar is, it's much easier to go out and say, this does not have to be perfect. All this has to do is accomplish that I will know more afterwards than I do right now. And then you just do that over and over again.
I had chills when you said it, and I love it. And it is a perfect segue, because we want to get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
And the last talk that I led for Google was Dan Pink. And we did this really fun this or that thing where you just gave some he gave some rapid fire answers. Sure. And legit, when I was doing it, I thought, this is so much fun. I can't wait to do this a second time. So Jason, you are going to be the second time of this or that on Talks at Google. All right. So I'm just going to throw something out, this or that, and I'm looking for your quick response for us to get to know you a little bit better. And then after that, maybe we'll do a little bit more on the deeper questions about the book, and we'll do some potential Q&A if people have questions. And I've got plenty more to ask if we don't have any audience questions.
Sure.
Jason Feifer.
Yes.
Tea or coffee?
Tea. I didn't grow up. I did not. This is a fact nobody needs. I did not grow up drinking coffee. And therefore, now when I drink caffeine, it makes me feel like I'm going to explode. Like I feel like I have an anxiety attack. So decaf tea.
I also don't drink coffee, and I also drink decaf tea. I didn't know that. Spicy or sweet?
Oh, hard. Sweet. I I would have. This is now this is going to get into like too much information, but I feel like I have to contextualize
Safe
everything.
space. Bring it all in. Bring it all into the conversation.
Sweet. I used to love spicy. Then I had a lot of acid reflux. Spicy, no good. Sweet.
Okay. All right. Noted. Breakfast or no breakfast?
Oh, breakfast. Otherwise, I'm a mess.
Book or e-reader?
Book. I don't own an e-reader.
Okay. Classic, old school.
Mm-hmm.
Reading or writing?
Writing. I don't read nearly as much, and I write every day.
Bowling or putt-putt?
Bowling or putt-putt? Oh. Bowling. There's something very satisfying about chucking a large, heavy object.
Yes, significant difference in the size of object in those two sports. Yoga or parkour?
I've never done parkour, but it sounds more fun. So I'm going to say parkour until I break an ankle, and then it'll be yoga.
All right, sounds good. Yoga, restorative yoga for that.
Yeah.
Super Bowl game or commercials?
Oh, Super Bowl game. Commercials in theory, but the commercials they never live up to how exciting they're supposed to be.
Fair enough. Staples or paper clips?
Paper clips, because you can reuse them.
Practical. Moose or hedgehog?
Moose or hedgehog? Hedgehog. I've heard that moose will murder you. I've heard that like if you run into a moose, like it's a very bad situation.
A hedgehog is not going to murder you.
No,
I feel like that's a fair assumption. All right, which phase is harder for you, panic or adaptation?
The panic phase, because the panic phase is when you feel lost. And then as soon as I get into adaptation, like as soon as I have an idea of what it is that I could do, I get really excited and then want to move as fast as possible.
And I would imagine you can kind of like that. It's not always linear.
No,
right? I'm veering. I have two more this or that questions. The last two are focused on the book. But just to pull the thread on that one, I would imagine that it's not like I'm in panic, I'm in adaptation,
no,
I'm in new normal,
right.
and I'm in wouldn't go back. That you can backslide, you can move around. One day or 1 hour might feel like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm really feeling like I'm hitting my groove, and then 2 hours later, you might feel like, oh, I'm panicking again. Is that true that you can move around within those?
Oh yeah, totally. This is not a linear experience. And also let's be clear, even if you make your way all the way through in whatever messy way it is, and you get to wouldn't go back, you are not done, because that was just that phase of change.
Sure.
Something else in your work or life is going to change, and the whole thing will happen over again. Which means that the best that we can do, that shouldn't be exhausting. Instead, the best that we can do, I think, is that when we go through these cycles, is to think of this one, whatever change you're going through right now, think of this one as the conscious cycle, which is to say that you're going to track it. You're going to be aware. This was my panic. This is what I did. This is how I built something new. This is how it worked out. Even write it down. Write a message to yourself so that when it happens again, and it will, you can say, I have the evidence now from my own experience that this cycle leads to something good at the end. This is the conscious cycle.
Yeah, that's great. The conscious cycle. What do you focus on more, your strengths or your development areas?
That's a great question. In my early career, it was definitely my development areas. I kept asking myself two questions that drove every job decision that I made, which was, what do I need to learn, and have I learned it? And for me, as soon as I learned something, and to be clear, I came up this, just to place this anecdote, I came up in an industry very different from working at Google. Google is obviously a gigantic company with a lot of different opportunities and lots of different layers and paths. And I came up in small media companies where there often wasn't that much else to do, where you had to sit around and wait for some other editor to leave in order to have new. So anyway,
sure. we feel very grateful here, by the way, for so much opportunity and just creativity of that opportunity set B, the what's available to you. There's so much available to us at Google,
which is incredible. But so take this thinking that I'm just saying, and maybe apply it to the role or the place that you are right now. And when you feel like it's time to push for something new, is again, what do I need to learn, and have I learned it? As soon as I answered to myself, yes, to have I learned it, I was ready to move on. So I would take a job at Men's Health and I would say, what do I need to learn? What I need to learn is this particular style of writing and editing. And then have I learned it? Yes. Okay, time to get out of here. And I got to go to a different place and learn something else. And so I was very, very focused on that. Now I am still focused on my development, but I've almost merged it. I know what I'm good at, and I know that I could always be better at those things. And so I'm really, really interested in like what incremental advancements am I not paying attention to that I should?
Yeah, that's very valuable. Last rapid fire.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll take some audience questions.
Great.
Make change as it comes or change before you must?
So this is a tee up. So change before you must, because if you look, there are really only two ways to, we've established over the last 45 minutes, change will happen. Change is happening. And so there are really only two ways that you can deal with it. Number one is that you can wait for it to slam you in the face and then just try to move as fast as possible to adapt to it. Number two is that you can proactively evolve or change so that you're doing it on your own terms at a timeline that makes sense.
Are you willing to give maybe a 30-second example of that? Because I'd love to hear more about what you mean here, but I also see that we have a bunch of questions that people are excited to ask you. So what do you mean by that?
I'll give you the 30-second version. I have I tell this story in depth in my book, but anyway. So the example that I love to use for this is there's a guy named Sam. He created a brewery called Dogfish. Maybe people have had their beer. And in the very beginning, he created this beer that was incredibly successful and popular called 60-Minute IPA. And it very quickly rocketed to become 75, or was on track to become 75 to 80% of all sales of his brewery. 75 to 80% of everything that he made was going to be this one beer. A lot of people would say, amazing. What is the point of business if not to have a hit product and make a lot of money?
Double down. We're
going to sell everything. We're going to make like 60-minute IPA hats and like everything. But he says, no, this is a problem. And the problem is that tastes change. So he knows that he could ride this thing for a while, but all he will do is ensure that everybody associates him with this one beer. And then as soon as IPAs are no longer as popular, he will go from being a hot IPA brand to an old brand. And that's death. So what he did is he changed before he had to, which is to say that he capped sales of his best-selling beer 50%, which made people furious. They're screaming at him on the streets, and literally screaming at him on the streets. And so, but he said, look, while we try to keep up with demand, which was a lie, he totally could have, but while we try to keep up with demand, why don't you try some of our other styles of beer? And as a result, he got his wide range of beers into restaurants and liquor stores and Amtrak and so on, and formed an impression of his company, not as a hot IPA brand, but as an innovative brand. And an innovative brand is a brand that you can sell for $300 million, which is exactly what he did. That is not something that he would have done if he just waited for change to come to him and had put everything into IPAs and then just assumed it was change. So what's the takeaway there for you? I have these friends who are consultants. They have a consultancy called Pen Name Consulting, and they run through this exercise with their clients, which they told me about and which I love, which is that they ask them, and you can ask this of yourself, because this is not just for people running businesses, this is for anybody. Ask yourself, is it a door or is it an engine? What does that mean? Well, imagine that you're driving down the street. If your door falls off, that sucks, but the car still drives. But if the engine falls off, the car is not going anywhere. So you need to think, whenever you see change coming, whenever you see something shifting in the company, in your industry, in your own role, in your own team, is it a door or is it an engine? Because if it's a door, then it requires some fixing, but you can manage it. If it's an engine, if you see an engine falling off, which is what Sam saw an engine. He saw that if this beer is too popular, it is going to destroy his business as soon as tastes change. Then you have to change now. Don't wait for it. Don't wait for that engine to fall off. Change now. Make some kind of major shift. Even if that major shift is just, I'm going to commit myself to learning something new. I'm going to commit myself to building some new connections. I'm going to start having very serious conversations at Google about my future and what it is that I want to do next. Like, you have to take action as soon as you see an engine.
And I imagine the opposite could be true too, where the world's on fire. This
Right.
thing happened. I got reorged from a team in New York to a team in Chicago, and I feel like my engine has totally been demolished. But really, no, it's just the lock on the door.
Right.
Just needs a little repair.
Perfect. Perfect.
All
Absolutely.
right, let's go to some Q&A.
Great.
I am very excited to see what folks want to ask you. So Cecilia Yang is asking, Jason, given the current macroeconomic environment, rather, it's hard not to tie the work you are expected to do to it's hard not to tie to the work you are expected to do rather than to explore opportunity set B. How do you deal with this?
It's a good question. Well, okay, so let me try to break that down.
Hmm.
So basically, right, so
It's
we have
I can also interpret this a little bit with a Google lens.
okay, give it.
There's a lot of energy around sharpening our focus and really focusing on the core right now, which makes it potentially feel tough to think about the auxiliary, superfluous things, that are outside of your core job. Which
Right.
I offered one thing already, Cecilia, which is think about how you can explore those things within your core job, asking for that speaking opportunity within your core job as opposed to just that written communication opportunity. But Jason, perhaps you have others that strike that balance of you still are focusing on what's needed for the business, but still learning and growing to work your next job.
Right. So look, so Cecilia, I really appreciate the question. The opportunity set B thing can sound sometimes like what I'm asking you to do is to step way outside of your core expertise and find something else. It doesn't have to be like that, though. Consider that when I said, for example, my example of getting in front of the camera, that felt like it was different, but it's also the same because my core skill set is storytelling and communications. And what I had done was given myself another avenue to do that same thing. So it wasn't really expanding outward in a kind of random way. It was actually identifying and drilling deeper into what I'm really good at and then making sure that I was maximizing that. Something that I hear a lot from very successful people is that they reach some kind of moment in which they are forced to reckon with what they are really good at and what they are not, and then let go of some of the things that they thought they needed to do. I'll give you a great example. So I, years ago, interviewed Mark Randolph. Mark Randolph was the first CEO of Netflix. And he and Reed Hastings had co-founded this company. And Mark was the first CEO, and it, they got it off the ground, and it grew, and then it just flatlined. And one day, the co-founder, Reed, walks into Mark, the CEO's office, and says, "Hey, I got a PowerPoint presentation to show you." Mark says, "Great." So they sit down, and he shows this presentation about how Netflix is doing. The punchline is Mark should step down as CEO. And now this is not an easy thing to hear. And Reed takes off and lets Mark sit there and think about it. And Mark kind of lets the office shut down around him. And then he goes home and has a lot of wine with his wife. And he comes to this realization. And the realization is that Reed is right. And the reason is because Mark thought of himself as a CEO for all times, but he wasn't. You know what he is? Mark is exceptionally good at taking something from idea to execution. That's what he's really good at. That's what he did at Netflix. But you know what he's not? He's not a scale CEO. He's not the guy who gets it from execution to, a bazillion X. That's somebody else's skill set, which turned out to be Reed Hastings' skill set. And once Mark realized that, he realized that there's no shame in that. That actually, that's an amazing thing to realize of yourself. Because as soon as you recognize what your actual core value is, then you can just make sure that you're delivering on that in every way possible. Nobody has ever said Shaquille O'Neal was a crappy basketball player because he couldn't shoot three-pointers. It doesn't matter because he was just really good at the things that he was good at. So Cecilia, when I say opportunity set B, I'm not necessarily asking you to just come up with totally random things that feel way outside of what you do, but rather asking you to consider what is your absolute core value, think about it in an elemental way, and then start to look for other opportunities to refine and grow there.
Yeah, fantastic. Next question. Katrina is asking, how do you experiment respectfully without stepping on anyone's toes? I come from startup, but in a bigger matrixed company. What do you recommend as an impactful approach?
That's a great question. Well, look, obviously it's going to depend in some way on what the experiment is. And, Jenny, perhaps you could contextualize how what people might think of as experiments within their job might feel like it's toe stepping. But I think that in what Katrina is describing here, the absolute key is going to be about communication and framing what you're doing as effort towards value. Right? That what you're doing isn't about just enriching yourself. But if you have to explain this to somebody else, or if you want to get other people on board with what you're doing, you want to identify goals that your team has and then frame what you're doing as functionally you learning how to achieve those goals better, to identify new opportunities that can perhaps help the company or help your team achieve those goals. I think the thing that is often the gulf here is when somebody is doing something and somebody else just doesn't know the purpose of it. And so they see it as maybe selfish or as out of bounds. But everybody at Google, everybody in your team is trying to accomplish the same thing. And it's possible they have different ideas on how to do that. And so if you identify some experiment, some opportunity to try something, and you're really clear about what its goal and purpose is, even if who knows if it's going to achieve that, I think that you get more buy-in from people around you.
Yeah, and I'd offer two additional things here to contextualize it for this audience. One, assumptions, and two, credit. Assumptions. Don't assume that everything's already being solved. Even if we have a team of 100 people working on the Blue Widgets project, maybe they've got the roadmap of the product, launches, but maybe you could come in and help them reprioritize that roadmap based on what you're hearing from the customer because you're closer to the customer. So test the assumption that everything's already being solved, even if there are 100 people working on it. And number two is credit. I think that with the stepping on toes, you're a little bit worried about, someone's doing that. Would I be taking away from them? And I would say just communicate, like Jason said, and then share credit in the email where you talk about the thing and send it to leadership where you're saying, we made this, we reprioritized the roadmap. And, I'm so excited I was able to help here and go team. Make sure you have the people's names at the bottom who also participated, as simple and tactical as that. So one, test assumptions, and two, share credit.
I love that. That was a lesson that I actually had to learn in a way at Entrepreneur in my earlier time as the editor-in-chief. When I would talk about things that we were doing and the magazine was doing, I used I way too much. And the president of the company actually called me out on it. And he said, you often say I when you should say we.
We, yeah.
And it was a big, good lesson.
Good advice. See, it wasn't win or lose. It was win or learn. You learned something. All right. Let's take another question. Okay, Mike is asking, when you're having a panic spiral in the moment when something goes wrong, what's your best advice for pulling out of it?
So, Mike, thanks for the question. And look, sometimes the best thing that we can do is that we can try to contextualize our own experience and try to identify opportunity in the thing that we're feeling lost on. You might remember years ago, I promise this is not getting political at all, but it includes a political figure, which was Donald Rumsfeld once was explaining something about the invasion of Iraq. And he said, there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And everybody made fun of him for that. And I was really curious, what was that? Where did that come from? Well, what was he talking about? Was it just poetry? No, it was something that came out of something called the Johari window, which was a self-assessment tool from the 1970s that has become very popular in the military, which is why he was familiar with it. And the idea is to start to recognize what you know and what other people know and what other people know that you don't know. And that turns out to be, I think, a really helpful exercise for us, where we can start to break down whenever we're in some kind of panic, step back, start to take the knowledge that you have and just put it down. Ask yourself, what do I know that other people know? What do I know that other people don't know? What do other people know that I don't know? And once you start to do that, you start to recognize, okay, here's the situation. I'm feeling totally panicked about this shift here, but here are my skills. Here's what I'm aware of. Here's what I know. Here's my value. I know how to do this thing really well, better than other people. That's my value. That's why I occupy this role and not somebody else. But what do other people know that I don't know? Well, let me look around. You're obviously not going to know the answer to that because otherwise you would know it, but you're going to see signs of it. How did that person get to where they are? How is that happening over there? And I can't figure out how to get it to happen for me. Those are signs. Those are signs that there is something out there still for you to know. And it also gives you a direction. Because again, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, a lot of this comes down to autonomy. If you're in a panic spiral, it's because you do not feel in control of the situation at all. You don't feel like you can grasp it. But what I have just done here by stealing Donald Rumsfeld's funny little thing is I've given you a direction. What do other people know that I don't know? You have identified some of it. Now it's time to go talk to them or time to learn something or whatever it is. You have a sense of what is the gap that you can fill, which gives you something to do. It's a task. It's a mission. And that gives you a sense of competency. And that will replace some of the panic because now you simply have something to do, right? Oftentimes we're panicking because there's just nothing to do. And if you have something to do, then you can go do that instead of sitting around and biting your nails.
Yeah, it gives you something to do with yourself. It gives you a mission. It gives you an objective. It at minimum takes your mind off of the panic, and at maximum can be quite productive.
Yeah.
I have taken so much wisdom away from you. Here are just a couple of things. Know that value statement that nobody can take away from you, that I statement that's carefully crafted, that has nothing to do with your tasks or your skills or your roles or your title. Work your next job. You've got opportunity set A, you've got opportunity set B, even if it's a small thing while you're still remaining, focused on the core, a small skill you can build within your current role. And then finally, is it a door or an engine? Be mindful if the door fell off or if the engine completely disintegrated and where you are. Jason Feifer, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's a pleasure to have you on Talks at Google. And thank you for the book you wrote and for sharing your ideas with the world.
Oh my God. Thank you, Jenny. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. And thanks to everyone at Google for all the great work you do. I am a big user of all things Google. And so it's an honor to be here.